Chapter 6. It was almost midday when Pat, accompanied by George Pike and his man, boarded Pat's Gulfstream, ready to take off at London City Airport. The terminal building was eerily empty at a time of day when it should have normally been packed with excited Londoners heading for Ibiza. The traffic was down 90%, which meant there were no delays, a situation that arranged Pat Kennedy, who had seen traffic from what was once a small, almost private airport explode, transforming it into a bus station for mostly younger travellers heading for a rave in Palma de Mallorca or Ibiza. A couple of hours later, the Gulfstream landed at San Sebastian's small airport on the banks of the Bidasoa, the river that separated Spain from France. After disembarking, they were greeted by a funereal silence. The terminal was even quieter than London, and barely 5 minutes after the passport formalities, they exited arrivals where Anna warmly greeted Pat and his friends. They were just 18 kilometres from San Sebastian's La Concha area, just enough time for Anna to fill Pat in on the story of the manuscript. Sir Patrick Kennedy was not only the head of INI Hong Kong, an international banking giant, he was also a generous patron of the arts, a collector with real interest in history and archaeology. 2 years earlier he had backed Anna's excavation of a Spanish galleon that had sunk off the Caribbean coast of Colombia at the beginning of the 18th century, salvaging its extraordinary cargo, now known as the treasure of the Espiritu Santo, and housed in a museum in Cartagena de Indias built by his bank. Anna Bazurko, through her research, had located the site of the wreck, and Pat Kennedy had provided the scientific and logistical backup along with the Colombian government during the operations. Towards the end of the underwater excavations and the salvage of the treasure, the divers discovered a cache of rare pre-Columbian artifacts that had been on their way to Spain aboard the Espiritu Santo, artifacts that had their origin in the north, either in the Mayan or Aztec regions of Central America. This brought Pat and Anna to Honduras and Belize, accompanied by Scott Fitznorman and the renowned French archaeologist René Weil, who identified the objects as Mayan, similar to discoveries already made in what is now Belize. Pat's interests in Mesoamerican civilizations had grown following a strange encounter with Ken Hisakawa in Nicaragua a few years earlier. They had become good friends, and Ken, a professor of archaeology at Columbia University in New York, had subsequently invited Pat to join him on several expeditions in Meso and South America. Ken had taught Pat how numerous like civilizations had evolved over a period of nearly 3,000 years, rising and falling in the vast region that now lay between Texas and the Yucatan Peninsula and the Guatemalan lowlands. Amongst them were the Aztecs and their predecessors to the north, and the Maya to the south. The Aztecs, or Mexica as they called themselves, were a Nahuatl people whose powerful empire emerged in central Mexico and who dominated the people around them at the time Cortes and his conquistadors disembarked on the Caribbean coast at the beginning of the 16th century. They had originated in the semi-arid region of northern Mexico, one of the many semi-nomadic tribes that had long inhabited the region. In the 14th century they migrated south and occupied the fertile valley of Mexico, where they were seen as Chichimecs, or barbarians, by the already advanced people established in their cities along the valley. There the Aztecs built their own city, Tenochtitlan, on the wetlands surrounding Lake Texcoco, and adopted the culture of the pre-existing peoples, which included a writing system developed over the century, used by other peoples of central Mexico. "Tell me, Barry, who is the legal owner of the Codex?" asked Pat Kennedy. "A Cayman Island company, Cavendish Holdings." Simo, after being caught out by Anna's question, had not wasted his time during the night, setting up a cascade of screen companies, firstly in Belize, then Panama, and finally the Cayman Islands, covering the trail of the Codex in a series of transactions that effectively obscured its origin. Pat Kennedy needed little convincing. The Codex was undoubtedly a sensational discovery. He agreed to advance $1 million, deposited in the Cayman Island account indicated by Simo, followed by 50% of the final valuation. The confidential agreement between Cavendish Holdings and a company named by Kennedy included a hold harmless clause that would protect Simmons from claims that could arise relating to the origin and ownership of the Codex and the sums paid to him by Kennedy. Simmons was a lawyer, and protecting the ownership of assets, offshore companies and bank accounts was his stock in trade. With near on 30 years' experience in the Caribbean under his belt, he knew all the tricks of the trade. At the same time, Pat Kennedy was no slouch in offshore transactions. His bank was built around such business, and he respected an old fox like Simmons. He had his own lawyer, James Herring, who he could count on to protect his interests in any court of law. The only thing that puzzled Pat was Simmons' apparent evident need for cash. After all, a long career in Belize as a lawyer should have assured him of a comfortable retirement. Little did he know of Simo's difficulties in paying for the villa he had bought on the Spanish island of Ibiza the previous year, before the COVID pandemic struck and the disaster it presaged for his plans following his disastrous foray into real estate development.